Hey, what's up, guys? Another commitment in the fold. We're gonna break down what this new commitment means, how it's gonna impact the receiver room, and a lot more on today's Locked On Badgers.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Ryan Herring's your host of Locked On Badgers. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for making Locked On Badgers your first listen every single day. Today's episode is also brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And we're going to bring in our guest today, Justin Julka, the brainchild of the original Bucky cast. And always great to have you on the show, man. Ton of stuff to get to. Official visits are happening. Again, appreciate everybody that's tuning in. And we're going to get right into it. So the Badgers picked up their second commit in as many days. Collin Dixon, a 6'2", 205-pound receiver out of Talamage, Ohio, mid-three-star guy. Justin, I know you've had a chance to look at the film. What do you think of Collin coming into the class?
I like him. Highly productive player this last year. He had a huge yards per catch. I think he's got a good build. He's going to be a guy who I think will have some decent size at the college level. He's got easy speed to him. He's not a guy who's short, choppy steps. He kind of glides when he's on the field. I don't know if he's a burner. I wouldn't say that. But I think he's a guy who's going to have some good physicality at the wide receiver position. And I think that he'll turn into a solid player.
Yep. Let me ask you this. One of my concerns with, and not Collin per se, but a receiver who isn't, because he's a 6'2" receiver who doesn't seem like a burner, right? He doesn't seem like a burner on film. Is there a concern there that at the college level, the physicality he's able to play with against high school players maybe will not translate?
I don't know if I'd necessarily say that I'm concerned with that with him. I think the fact that he looks like a long strider. I think if you're having him on the outside, I think that actually helps him separate a little bit, because I think that he's not going to lose a lot provided he runs decent routes. Guys who have short, choppier steps, it's a double-edged sword. Some of them get out of those breaks really quick. Some of them, they lose a step because of the fact their steps are so short and choppy. We have not had big guys like this recently. We're really, over the last couple cycles, with Whitted targeting some new skill sets. I actually think, provided he puts on good weight and he learns to use his body well and becomes a decent route runner, that he can be a plus receiver at the Big Ten level. Now, that's a lot to go right, and he's showing some quality at the high school level, but obviously it's a different ball game once you get to college.
Yeah, something interesting that I think Collin probably brings to the field, and you hit on this, and I wanted to expound on it because I think it's a really good point. You look at the receivers Wisconsin had recently, the Pryors, the Danny Davises, even Chimere, who we both really like Chimere. None of those dudes are going to break a tackle and pull someone for 15 yards, right? Yeah. None of those dudes has the level of physicality that a Marcus Allen on the roster has, and that this guy potentially brings into the field. And I think that's a big element. You could get a guy who could be a bit of a yak monster for you with this kid's build, and obviously he doesn't go down easy at all.
Yeah, one of his first highlights is him getting grabbed around the hips, somebody trying to pull him down, and he just kind of shrugs him off and keeps going. And it's like, that's lower body strength. We have not had, Pryor and Danny Davis, God love them. They were 6 foot, $100. And even at the end, I know they probably showed like 185, 190 on the roster. I don't buy that. Like, they were not big guys. And the area they struggled is they were not overly physical.
Well, and Cephas was a physical guy, right? Yeah. He was definitely somebody that was a little difficult to bring down, but really outside of Cephas.
Yeah. And Cephas, I will say, actually played above his weight. I think he was right around 200 as a junior. And I think you would say that he played like a guy who's 210, 215. Like, he was a brute out there, a wide receiver.
I also like with Dixon, he looks like he has really good hands. There's a lot of hand catches. Yeah. It's not cradling the ball, snatches it, great balance, turns it upfield. There's a lot to like in the film. I don't think he's a burner. He's not that dude, but he can win in other ways at the college level, which I think we're both kind of saying in different ways.
Yes. Worst case scenario for him, he turns into a good possession receiver for you, because I think he will have the hands, and I think he'll get the route running down. If he doesn't blow the top off the defense, that's fine. I think Wisconsin's collected a few guys that have that in their skill set. that I think will eventually get to that point. So,
well, that's a good transition, because the other thing I want to talk about, bringing Dixon into the fold here, the other receivers on the roster right now, I think you and I both agree that we're very excited. I mean, they have to prove it, but the collection of receivers, to me at least, the upside there with Marcus Allen, Chimere, Skylar Bell, Vinny Anthony. There's a group of players coming in, and who did I miss out? Oh, Tommy McIntosh and Keontez Lewis, right? The UCLA transfer. McIntosh, a 6'5" guy. I'm as excited about this collection of young receivers as I've maybe been in. I can't even remember at Wisconsin. Like it's been a long time since I've been this excited about the upside of this group.
We have lacked size at the wide receiver position for a long time. Toon, I think, was the last guy we had that actually had decent size at wide receiver, and he played with it. Like you watch him play, he wasn't a burner, but he had great size at the position, and he used his body really well, and he had good hands. So he was able to make a ton of plays for us his last couple of years in school here. I think that, the thing is that you're looking for wide receivers. You want to find physical advantages, whether it's speed, quickness, route running. You want something that a player looks like he can excel and be better than whoever's across the field at him. I think what we're seeing is you're not going to see a lot of corners that are 6'3" with good strength and speed and good hips. So if you can get wide receivers that are that, and they can box out a smaller guy, you suddenly have an advantage there. Well, now if you can find a slot guy who's a little bit smaller and has that quickness, which I think you and I would agree the area that they've struggled with is in that position, finding guys who had elite quickness. We might have found some guys that had good speed, but I don't think we've done a great job at finding guys that blow up that first 15 yards.
Right. I mean, Aaron Cruikshank would have been that guy.
Well, yeah, but he weighed like 140 pounds.
Yeah, well, that's how he got so fast, right? He wasn't carrying any weight with him. He was like
and he didn't have any
rabbit out there. So I think, and I agree with what you're saying. I think to put it in another way, you want to find receivers that you can project, that can win in a certain way, right? And with some of the receivers we had recently, with Danny Davis and a Kendrick Pryor, a Jack Dunn, the guys going out there, it's hard to say exactly where they were constantly winning. Whereas the group now, Chimere can take the top off. Marcus Allen can out physical guys. Tommy McIntosh is 6'5", right? There's just markers there that seem like physically they're going to translate.
Yeah. I mean, I think God love, Pryor and Danny Davis, but they were guys who were average to good at a lot of different things, but they weren't exceptional at anything. And I think that's where you're looking for is are you willing to give up a little something in one category to find something that receiver's exceptional at something else, whether it be size and ability to create the mismatch and use their body, or whether it be quickness or something. I mean, there's guys all over college football that have that one skill. It's kind of like the NBA, right? You want a guy who's at least excellent at one thing, and if you can develop something else, great. We're never going to be Ohio State. We're not going to get the guys who are good at 3 or 4 things.
Right. Which is okay. Like it really is. Like I made a podcast, and I don't want to diverge too much off of what we're talking about now, but I made a podcast about why we can't ever beat Ohio State. And one of the points that I made is obvious. Like some of these are obvious points. Our receivers haven't been nearly as good as theirs. And I said, but we're closing the gap, which led to a cavalcade of Ohio State fans say, no, you're not. Look at our stars. But I'm like, no. It's not about
being on that level.
Right. It's about closing the gap.
It's like it's going from excellent to average to excellent to good.
Right. Because once you're excellent, you don't get more excellent.
Yeah.
You're already at first.
It's diminishing returns. Wisconsin has a much easier time if we get 2 above average wide receivers.
Right. Agreed.
Then suddenly it makes a huge difference for what our offense is capable.
And I think that's where this is headed. So I like Dixon, and I love the receiver class we're bringing in. Coming up, guys, I haven't had a chance to pick Justin's brain with Jordan Mayer, the other recent commit, the outside linebacker. We're going to do that. We're going to talk a little bit about the outside linebacker room, the point I made of Wisconsin getting to the point where they really just reload that spot. They don't rebuild anymore. So I want to pick his brain on that. First, today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your betting needs, all of your betting information, sports news, wagers, futures, props. It's also a great spot just to go online, have some Vegas games, blackjack, roulette. Lots of things you can do there. The website is incredibly easy to use, and they have tons of amazing futures. We've talked about the Badgers. 8.5 is the number over under. Justin and I are both homers. We both went over. We both went over last year as well, just FYI. So maybe you want to go the opposite of where we're headed with this one. But it's a great place. If you have a few dollars, do it responsibly. NFL season's a couple months out. Futures there. Baseball is the pennant races are going to be heating up pretty soon. The Brewers and the Braves, both of our teams here on this show, Justin and myself, are both locked in the wild card race. Lots of fun to be had. Do it responsibly. Jump on the website. Use your mobile device. Head to the website today. Learn more about the trends and actions. Bet online where the game starts. Thank you, everybody, again, for making Locked On Badgers your first listen every day. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. We appreciate it. We appreciate your time. When you're done here on June 16th, the NBA draft's coming up. Check out the NBA mock draft, 50 insiders. Nothing is better than this. Locked On NBA big board draft experts, plus other insiders. First pick is June 16th. You're going to want to follow along as we break down how the NBA draft might play out. All right, guys, we're going to bring Justin back on the show here. We're going to talk about Jordan Mayer. And I'm really curious to get your take on this because I think you and I may look at him similarly, but I comped him to a guy. Who does he remind you of? What does his game look like to you? And where does he kind of fit into the Wisconsin defense?
I look at him. He reminds me a great deal of Garrett Dooley. You and I had talked about it a little bit before we came on, and you're like, that's the guy I comped him to.
That's the guy I comped him to.
And I look at him and I see this. I think he's big and physical. I don't think he's going to be a guy you really want out in space a ton. He has a lot of he'll be a great edge setter. I think the athleticism is there. I were talking about him versus Witt, and I think Witt was a little bit more explosive and violent from his spot at that time, and a little bit more length, which I think helped with that explosiveness. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think there's some freaking Witt if we actually get him out there and he's not injured.
Right.
So that's not saying that I don't think Mayer has a lot of upside to him, because I think he does. And if he ends up being a really good, edge setter and run stopper, Dooley got a couple practice squad invites.
Yeah, absolutely.
If he ends up being a better version of Dooley, that's an NFL roster.
Yep. Listen, Dooley was a really good player for Wisconsin.
He was.
Just because here's the thing. When I listen to some other podcasts, I listen to some other people. Every recruit is like the next Deion Sanders, the next, like TJ Watt. He looks a lot like Jonathan Taylor. Like those dudes are really rare for a reason. Yeah, Garrett Dooley was a winning player. And the fact that Mayer reminds me of Garrett Dooley is a testament to the fact that he sets the edge. He's strong. He's physical. Like I like him a lot.
Listen, I'll put it this way. When it comes to looking at outside linebackers, I think you and I would agree. We've seen enough of these guys now that you can start to pick the ones that you think, provided that they continue to develop themselves and get their bodies right, who's going to turn into a pretty good player. I think that he can push for a starter at Wisconsin. Do I think that he'll do it right away? No, I don't. I think it might take him a few years to kind of get his body right. Wisconsin's loaded at that position more than any other. There's going to be craziness going on there soon. And I think that kind of segues us to the second point you were talking about, which is the rebuild versus reload.
Right.
I would have said up until a couple of years ago, or probably about a year ago, that they were still a team that needed to rebuild, because I don't think we really have that second line depth that you looked at and you're like, if somebody goes down here, we can weather the storm. This year, I think we're going to look at it and it's going to be like, if somebody goes down for a season ender, it's like you're just plugging a new guy in who's starter level talent. And I think that they have successfully gotten to that point where there is a run here coming on outside linebackers from Wisconsin where we may see guys who are on the second team getting drafted. And that's because I think they'll be that productive as second line guys.
Yeah, I think it's similar to that run we had on the offensive line where the sixth starter on the line got drafted, right? I can't think of the top of my head who that was, but I think it's very that, and I don't even just mean outside linebackers, like inside linebackers. You and I have talked about this. We lost 2 NFL dudes, including just a monster. I don't think anyone's that concerned about the inside linebackers this year.
I think they'll be above average again. Right. I don't think they're going to be elite, but I think they'll be above average, which is most teams would kill for, in the Big Ten and nationally. Wisconsin's defense, I'm going to go out and say it flat out, is going to be very good this year. I'm going to guess that it's probably going to be top 10. I don't know what that means, but I think they'll be more turnover prone this year. And I do think the pass rush could potentially be better, because I think as we just talked about the depth there, it's not going to be Chanel coming up the middle. I think Herbig's going to have a big year. Yeah, and I think whoever's opposite of him is just going to be coming screaming downhill.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. There's not a lot of spots where I think Wisconsin, reloads. Linebacker is, to me, it's just become one of those spots where I feel good about. Here's
Yeah.
another way to put it. I feel good about like legitimately every scholarship dude on the roster, right? Like they all feel like dudes to me at the linebacker spot. And some of that's Bobby April, right? Some of that is just you give the benefit of the doubt at this point to Jim Leonard and who they've recruited. And then you look at the guys recently, the Bowlers and the Petersons and the Witts.
Well,
and
I think
Jake Ratzlaff. Like there's just dudes everywhere.
I think what you're seeing now is Wisconsin has gotten to the point where instead of having guys that they need a couple of years to physically get ready, they're getting guys now who are the 4-star guys who are ready to play after a year of learning what they're supposed to do in a system and can just come in and just start playing. And that's the difference. And instead of developing guys behind your starters, you now have guys that are ready to go out there and play at a high level right away. And I think that they're loaded with guys like that right now.
Yep. And the other part of this too, I've talked before, I think we talked before about the passing game, about Mertz, and about how a lot of it isn't his fault. He's been in a bad ecosystem, right? The receivers, the offensive line play, the play calling, it's all worked against him. He's had a different coach, offensive coach every single year, quarterback's coach. It's just been a disaster. Whereas the flip side's true on defense, right? The linebackers are coming into a great ecosystem. The system is set up for them. The players above them pass it down to them.
It's effectively a conveyor belt.
That's what I'm saying. And that's what people sleep on sometimes. And I'm not saying you do at all. I'm saying people out there in general don't look at this system as perfect. And these players are really talented. They come in and they excel. Meanwhile, Mertz, Mertz can easily make the argument here. And I'm not saying he ever would do this, but he could easily say, listen, I haven't been that great, but look at all this other crap, And so I think it's a perfect marriage on defense of that we've been bringing in big time talent, but the system's set up for them.
If Wisconsin ever starts getting 4 stars on that defensive line, we're looking at a legitimate, and I think that they could play with any team in the country right now, but we're talking about the separation is effectively what they would be Georgia, right? That's the difference right now. You're looking, you may be a little down on corners. I think we're a better scheme. I think we make up for it with scheme. And I think Wisconsin is more explosive in terms of the tackles for loss and sacks than Georgia typically is, but they're better on the back end.
Yeah, they're way
better
on the back end.
Yeah, and you can make the argument for that if it's you're splitting hairs. It really comes down to what you're more comfortable with. I think we would all agree you'd trade some of the sacks for consistently being able to stop on the back end, which I think is fair. But I think Wisconsin plays on aggressiveness, which I think in college you can get away with a lot more than in the pros, which is if you're willing to send your guys, there are very few quarterbacks that can make you pay for it.
And to be fair, this year's secondary could be super intriguing with all the transfers. There's
a lot of talent there.
Yeah, it might be about the best we've had in a long time.
Yeah.
Anything else you got on Jordan Mayer before we move on?
I like the pickup. I think we have a few guys that I think in the current commits here that I think we could see bumped. I'm not saying I think he's going to be a 4-star by any means, but I think it wouldn't shock me to see him be a high 3-star.
I'd agree with that.
Like an 88 guy. Sure.
I think he's a little underranked as well. I think he's a low to mid 3-star right now. He's one of our lower ranked commits. I don't think that's accurate. I think he's a mid to high 3-star guy.
Yeah.
All right, guys, coming up, we have a super intriguing slot receiver coming into town. I'm going to talk to Justin about him and then also ask kind of a bigger question about, is Wisconsin punching below its weight a little bit on the recruiting trail this cycle? But first, today's show is brought to us by the following sponsors. Thank you guys so much again for listening to Locked On Badgers, making this your first listen every single day. Really, really appreciate everybody tuning in. We're going to bring Justin back on the show, Justin Julka joining us. And we're going to talk a little bit about a couple things I want to ping you on, Justin, here. Tretch, and I hope I don't mispronounce this. Tretch Kakahana. Oh, man, I'm terrible right now. Oh, my God.
I'm not any better at this one, buddy.
Tretch Kakahana. It's Keauhun.
We're going to have to ask him for pronunciation.
This is terrible radio and television right now. But the point is,
can we just make him like, Prince? We'll just
I'm going to call him TK right now.
Yeah, that's fair.
So he paid his way. He's a slot receiver, 5'10", 185 pounds, 5'11", 185 pounds, out of St. Louis, Honolulu, which is the same high school that Nick Herbig was from. It's a powerhouse high school in Hawaii. he actually paid his way to Madison, unofficial visit.
Yep.
Impressed the coaches, ran really well. He's coming back on an official this upcoming weekend. Like that's one of those, the signal fires are lit, right? He paid his way. He's coming back on an official. He's probably going to commit. Every tea leaf points that way. I love his game. Like, I think he's explosive, fast. He's everything we've wanted from a slot receiver, except for the fact that I can't pronounce his name, which is totally on me. But what do you think?
He's going to be really good just because of that, right?
I hope so. Listen, TK, I hope he crushes it.
Tiki.
But what do you think about the game?
I have made no bones about this. I actually think he might be the best guy we're targeting in the slot. I love his frame for a guy who's a slot receiver. He's a little bit stockier. Guy separates so easily off the line. Yeah. And that is something Wisconsin has not had. And he plays in a good conference. So, I mean, this isn't a guy who's playing against a bunch of guys who are overmatched. He's actually playing against some other good athletes on the field, and he easily gets away from his man. I think he runs pretty solid routes. I think he'll get better there. But I think he just screams off the line when he goes. And he's a guy who I think has some deep ability to him simply because he's so quick that he'll separate initially. There may be guys that track him down a little, just depending on what he is. But I think he ran a 4.4 at camp. And I think that's a legit 4.4. Wisconsin does do electronic timing at those camps now. So I think he's probably legit. Now he's not wearing pads. So we'll see if it translates, but it looks like on film it does.
Yeah. I really love it. He looks like, to me, the type of guy who's going to drive defenses crazy on 3rd and 5. Right? Because you can't cover, like, he's breaking left, right, in routes, out of the slot. Sorry. It is so tough to stay with guys like this. And defense is nuts.
The guy who originally I kind of took, I heard a few fans compare him to Erickson. I actually think he compares to, and I don't think he's quite on this level. Who is the slot receiver for Purdue a couple of years back? I can't think of his name right now. Playing for Cardinals.
Rondell Moore?
Yes. I think he's got a little bit of him and how he uses his feet.
That's high praise.
It is. I don't think he's quite on that level because I think he came in more polished. And I think there might be some elusiveness that Tretch doesn't quite have.
I mean, that guy beat Ohio State.
He did.
Like
but I think that that's the ceiling that this guy has if he puts it all together. Is that he's the type of guy that absolutely drives a defense nuts because they can't stay on him.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's something this team has missed for a long time, and they've tried to find it. This is something I would say to Paul Chryst credit, going out getting guys like Aaron Cruikshank, going out getting who's the guy who's been hurt a lot recently. I can't think of it. Stephen Bracey.
Yes, Bracey.
Yep. So they've tried to find the smaller slot guy who can isolate on a third defensive back and pick up 5 yards quickly, 7 yards quickly. So they've tried. This guy, I think, is better than all of them. I really like.
I don't think it's particularly close. I would say they're going to probably use who's our boy, the number 1 wide receiver this year,
Chimre.
I would probably put this guy's quickness in the slot over Chimre. I think Chimre's got some other physical tools that he's probably superior in, but I think the way this guy comes off the line is something that I don't think we have anybody on the roster right now that separates, explodes that quickly off the line.
So it goes back to what we said earlier, finding receivers who can translate some type of specific skill to the next level, right? And it's his short area quickness, being able to beat off coverage and just find an opening, get 5-7 yards. And, that's huge on the next level.
To put this into context, do you really care if against Ohio State, every time he breaks off the line and rather than get 20 yards, he gets an easy 7 every time because he just takes his man and gets tackled right away? We would love that.
Against Ohio State, getting an easy 7 would be like
what I'm saying. Like
that'd be like rain from the heavens. I mean, we never get an easy 7 against Ohio State.
But that's what you watch with Rondell Moore when he played him that time. Right. He just torched them on short routes where the guy just could not stay in front of him, and he would break it off. And he broke, to his credit, he broke some big plays.
Yeah, he did.
And I don't think that that's what Wisconsin's looking to do because I just don't think we have the passing game set up for it. We'll see how this year plays out and how it changes. But if you can do that where you can break down a defensive back, it's really hard to combat that as a defense. I guess you can bring guys up, but then you're taking the chance that this guy turns one upfield and it's just gone.
So I love that we're both excited about him because it's somebody that I liked a lot, and I wanted to ping your brain and see if I was crazy on him. I want to ask you this. I want to finish on this. We had and forgive me because I can't remember the YouTube user who left the comment, but a really interesting comment. He mentioned that Wisconsin hasn't really won, and I'm paraphrasing here, hasn't won a lot of recruiting battles against like programs, right? We've beaten a lot of Purdue's, Arizona's, Cal's. Like James Duran, for example, was Arizona and Cal. Broderick Pierce was Illinois. We talked about Collin Dixon. It was more of Purdue, Duke, Kentucky. If you look at these guys, Nate White,
there's something to be said for beating Purdue for a wide receiver, though.
Sure, 100%.
They're churning them out right now.
But should we be concerned that Wisconsin hasn't really won a marquee recruiting battle this cycle? And outside of Tackett Curtis, doesn't really look like they're maybe trending for one.
Well, I mean, we have Keys, who I think, he didn't have the offer at the time, but he has a Michigan offer right now.
He has one now as a linebacker, which is it's a little different to me than beating him.
It is, but much like we've seen in the past, that there is something to be said for that, whether the guy commits or not, to whether he sticks to it. How often have we seen it where, in the Bryson Shaw, Wisconsin locks him down. Ohio State comes in and offers him, boom, he's gone.
What about Kyle Dotson? You remember him?
Yeah. Similar situations where it's when bigger programs come in, and you could see some of these guys still happen. Now, the one thing I'm going to say about this year's recruiting is normally we would see the linemen be where we see a lot of the offers shown. And that's where you'd see the big thing. Now, I think that we can all say to an extent there's been some level of fool's gold with what we've seen from some of that. And that we haven't really seen, and we'll see what changes now with Bostad back at offensive line, but we haven't seen first-round talent coming out of those guys with those super high offers quite yet.
They're also pretty young in the program.
They are, but some of those guys have been in for 2 or 3 years now. And now it's the time where this is the season they need to start showing NFL chops. So at this point now, I do try or believe in Bostad when it comes to this, because most of the guys that he turned into first rounders weren't exactly guys that were mid to high 4 stars. I think most of them were mid 3s to high 3s. Might have been a 4-star here and there that was in. I mean, look at Travis Frederick. The guy was one of the best centers in the NFL. That guy was a mid to high 3-star. Came in his redshirt freshman year and started and just dominated.
I thought he started as a freshman and then redshirted.
Was it? Was it? Okay. So. That could be.
Yeah.
He might have been straight up
right away.
I mean, he was physically just a man-child with
monster.
Strength. Yeah.
Russell Wilson once said about him, that's the most bear-like human being I've ever seen in my life. It's one of the great
which
quotes.
I think is accurate. And the beard showed it.
But so you're, I guess, to bring it back, because you were meandering down a different path here, which you do aptly at times. Yeah. So you're not that worried about the fact that Wisconsin hasn't really
I
been
think
winning.
A lot of the positions that we normally, like wide receiver, I think we normally are seeing roughly about the same level of competition for the guys that we go after.
I think that's fair.
I think running back, I'm going to trust right now that we know what we're doing at running back. It's not easy for me to say that because I think our recruiting there has been very hit or miss. I think that we have been lucky that we've hit on some guys because I don't think the depth has been there the last few years.
Right.
So at this point, I'm hopeful that Keys is a big hit. And then I think Nate White actually shows some things. You and I both like what he puts from a skill set standpoint.
Nate White. Yeah.
I think that he could be good. So I think that we're doing solid there. And I think Nate White, part of it is people knew he was likely going to Wisconsin. He was an in-state running back who actually liked the program. And I think that's kind of that's where the line there is kind of with running backs from Wisconsin is how receptive are they to the in-state school? That's what a lot of programs want to know. They'll come after you if they think that you're not a huge Badger, fan. But if you are, then they're kind of like, do we really want to put the resources into a kid who's got this much draw to the home state school?
I mean, that's a fair point. Like Nate White, if he's coming out of Georgia, Nate White has more offers.
Oh yeah, he's probably a 4-star back there.
I also think there's an element that I've always thought this class would be a little lower just in terms of the big battles because the recruiting department was still getting put together, quite frankly, and coaches were coming on board.
Where do you think it is? I think we're going to see some level of bump on the current some of our commits. I do think some of the guys are a little low. Now, I don't think we're going to see 2001 or 2021 level of increase, I think that was a outlier year, but I wouldn't be shocked to see us be 28 or low 30s for a class.
Well, it's going to be a big class, which helps, right? If we're talking just raw recruiting rankings, obviously the more people you have, the more it matters.
Yes.
I think this is in the 30s. This class is in the 30s, where I think a typical big class for the Badgers should typically be in the top 25. I think that should be kind of the baseline.
I think where this team should be at this point is, if they're doing things right with the level of program that we should be looking at potentially in a great year, a top 20 class. Otherwise, if it's a decent sized class, you want to see top 25. And I think that's something that should be strived for. If you're seeing a 23 person class and you're in the 35 range, that's a problem.
Which I think we might be there this year. And some of that, by the way, is, and we've talked about this before, there's a lack of in-state talent, right? That's just, it is what it is. And there's no amount of great recruiters that would change that this cycle. Well, some of it is you have new coaches coming into, they're establishing new recruiting. Like Al Johnson hasn't been coaching at D1 level. It's unfair to expect him to step in and have ties everywhere. Yeah. So that's going to take a year. Bobby Ingram, he's been in the NFL. It's going to take him a year. Like, I think it's unfair to expect those guys to fall out of different positions where they're not in Division I and instantly recruit well.
Oh yeah, I would agree with that.
And
the recruiting department all came together.
Came together, and we've talked about that one too, in terms of why
it
took so long.
I will say this, and I can't speak to what the national environment is in terms of recruiting. It would not shock me to see them late in this cycle potentially flip someone or steal someone.
I can see that for sure.
Where they get their legs under them and they take off. Because I do think like guys like Bobby Ingram are going to be good recruiters. I think that guy has it. Johnson seems extremely likable. He could be another guy. Heck, D'Onofrio, who we just brought in, was considered a
I love that hire, by the way.
Plus recruiter.
We don't really have time to get into that one, but I love that hire. I talked about it earlier. I absolutely love that hire. He's a recruiting coordinator with ties to Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Florida.
So exactly where we needed to refill.
And Texas. I mean, the guy's coached at Miami, Houston. He's coached at Temple, and he was born in New Jersey. Literally four of the richest talent states you can find. He's been a defensive coordinator 3 spots and was a recruiting coordinator. I just said we don't have time to talk about it, and then I spent 2 minutes talking about it. But I love that hire. All right, man, I got to cut this one just because I have to shut this down here pretty soon. I really appreciate you coming on, man. Yep. Anything else that you want to just kind of wrap a bow around what you've seen for these last 3 weekends of official visits that stuck out to you?
I am still kind of anxious, I guess you'd say, over after these first 2 weeks not being necessarily as explosive as I'd like. I do think they're going to pull in some good talent yet. We'll see. I mean, you and I have talked a little bit about some of the guys that they have coming up, but I think we're going to have a nice, strong couple of weeks coming in here. The next few weeks are going to be good to the Badgers in terms of filling up this class.
That I agree with. I think there's going to be a lot of people, which means more opportunities to have you on the show and chop it up with who we're bringing in. All right, guys. He is Justin Julka. As always, I appreciate everyone tuning in to the show, everyone listening. If you like it, leave a like, leave a review, subscribe to the show. We really appreciate it. Thank you for making Locked On Badgers your first listen every day, and we'll talk to you again soon.